Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear. This is Purna Mahajan.
Oh, good. Thank you. Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Okay, I'm Joan, Brant, your broker, and I think I know most everybody that's online. The purchase contract, I probably teach this about once a month. And the reason I do it, well, number one, I want you to learn it really well. And number two, being a broker, I have a lot of, different questions and or sometimes problems because somebody didn't interpret the purchase contract right. So we're just going to talk about it today. So number one, I'm going to give you scenarios. So if you go to an open house and you have somebody come in and they want to buy the house, and you haven't met these people before. So the first thing you want to do is to go into command, make those buyers or that buyer, make them a contact, and then in command, you want to go down to opportunities, and then you can, put them in as an opportunity as a buyer, put in their names, their emails, their phone numbers, whatever. And from there, you'll want to go choose a transaction. And then you can go ahead and you can choose, once you choose to do a transaction, you can decide if you want to do dot loop or if you want to do DocuSign. So whichever one you're most comfortable with. So anyway, well, once you do that, so if you run the dot loop, you choose all of your documents or DocuSign, to choose all of your documents. So anyway, and if anybody has any problem with that, particularly if you're new, Jen Vickers is our techie person, and you can always set up time with her or call her, and she'll tell you exactly what to do. Because it's a lot easier to start it out in command than to try to get it in there later. So let's just start out with the purchase contract. And at the very top, you put in your address and your date, and be sure you put in, the right county, wherever you are, and the parcel number, and then the address. And all you really have to do is put, the address 5949 in Portland Street, Dublin, Ohio, 43017. And you don't have to, put much else other than that. Put in your purchase price. So you type in the numbers, and then usually in parentheses, it's good to go ahead and spell it out. Under additional terms and conditions. So if you have, maybe it's contingent upon sale of another house or closing or winning a lottery or whatever contingencies you would have, that's where you want to put it in under additional terms and conditions. And I'm on my little laptop, and it's a little bit hard for me to look and see. But so you see where I'm pointing that says add a clause. So maybe there's something in there that you want to add a clause from there. So anyway, you would click on additional terms and conditions, add a clause, and then maybe you just want to do number one here about additional terms and verbiage on an additional page. So you click it and you add it. So there it is. So, and then anything else that might be a real contingency that's not pre-written into the contract, then go ahead and put it in. You're not going to say it's contingent upon obtaining FHA financing because you already have that in the contract. If it is a cash transaction, you don't have to put it up there, but I think it makes it stand out more if you do, because if you're competing and you have a cash offer, they'll pay more attention to it. And if anybody has any questions, please just interrupt and ask, because I think we always learn from that. I do have one person, Joe Bauer, is here in the room with me, so I have somebody I can look at, it's a lot easier. So, oh, and Ellie, you might want to write one. So, under attorney approval clause, always put something in there, put 2 days, 1 day, or whatever. At the time you write the contract, maybe your buyer doesn't know that they might want one, so just put it in there. And then under financing, so 3.1 is that they will pay cash. And so you would, click to initial, you'd have to, I don't have anybody up there, but you would assign their initials. And second sentence is important. Buyer shall deliver to the seller or seller's broker within, probably right now you'd want to put 1 day or a letter from the financial institution or current bank statement or something that says they do have the cash for this transaction. 3.2, that's if you're gonna finance it. So 3.2A is just the lender pre-qualification. And honestly, hopefully, most of the time you already have your pre-qualification letter to present with the contract. It just makes your offer stronger. 3.2B is the loan application. If I wrote a contract today, I would probably put in at least 1 day after acceptance to have them make the loan application. In this market, you just want everything to be as quick as possible. Now, if the buyer does not inform the seller or seller's broker in writing of the identity of the lender within the stated time period, seller may terminate this contract pursuant to paragraph 3.3. So you want to tell your buyers, they have a backup contract, or they might have a backup contract. It's really important that you go over the timelines on the contract. And if you say you're going to get that loan application done within 1 day, you get it done and let the seller's agent know that it's been done. Oh, you know what? I said this before. When I say I don't know why I say that. I'm sorry. Gotta get better at that. So, 2, the buyer shall provide the information and documentation and just comply with everything that they need to do to get all their paperwork done. So now, in big bold print, failure of the buyer to deliver the lender's written notification within 3 calendar days following buyer's receipt thereof constitutes a waiver of buyer's right to terminate the contract due to the buyer's failure to obtain financing. So I always like, when I write a purchase contract, I do the timeline, so I have it for my own purpose, but also for the buyer's purpose. And also, it's really good to go ahead and send it to the seller's agent so that they have it in front of them. Any questions? Good. Pretty easy, huh? Loan commitment. Let's say on this transaction, you're going to close it within 30 days. So the seller's obligations are contingent upon the buyer obtaining and delivering to the seller or seller's broker a loan commitment within. We're going to close in 30 days. I might put 20 days there, maybe 22 days. Soon enough. This time period shall be known as a loan commitment period. Buyer shall use good faith and reasonable efforts to obtain the loan commitment. The loan commitment shall state the lender will provide financing for the purchase of the property subject to conditions and qualifications imposed by the buyer's lender's discretion. So again, gotta impress on your buyer that they have to do their part in getting all the documentation to the lender. Because if they just, don't get all their stuff in and they don't get the loan, I mean, they possibly could not get their deposit money back just because they didn't do their due diligence to get their paperwork done. If at the expiration of the loan commitment period, the buyer has not delivered the loan commitment to the seller or seller's broker, the seller may terminate this contract pursuant to paragraph 13. On the appraisal contingency, I don't see so many contracts right now being written where they're waiving the appraisal contingency. Any thoughts from anybody on this, what you're hearing?
I actually do see this. I've seen it more this past year than I have ever. People waiving the appraisal contingency when they're still getting a loan, and the lender would determine that. But I'm not sure what the criteria is.
Yeah, I see it less, I mean, like, oh my gosh, last spring, last summer, I saw a lot. Right now, I'm not seeing it so much, but it's still, a different market out there. And so sometimes it is waived. And Krista, you've been writing a lot of contracts, so you probably wouldn't be in tune with that. She's not listening.
I'm listening to you.
Okay. So anyway, so back to if the property is appraised or otherwise valued for loan purposes for less than the purchase price stated herein, the buyer shall have the right to terminate this contract by written notice to the seller or seller's broker within 5 calendar days after the buyer receives the documentation. So at that point, the buyer can say, hey, you know what? My purchase price was $300, it came in at $275. Frankly, now I don't want the house. Or if they might, the buyer and the seller might say, hey, we'll split it in the middle and let's make it work. Or sometimes if the buyer really wants the house, they'll go up to the $300,000. But at any rate, failure of the buyer to deliver the written notice of termination within 5 calendar days following the buyer's receipt of the appraisal constitutes a waiver of the buyer's right to terminate pursuant to the provision. And I kind of wanted to go into some of this a little bit more today because I feel like in this market, everybody's in a hurry, they want to get the offer in. And I think that quite often the buyer doesn't know
Rudy?
exactly what's in the contract. They just click and sign. So as the agent, you just want to make sure with every offer that you do go through the contract with your buyer. Demand for financing evidence. It just says if the seller doesn't have the written notice from the buyer that they have all of their, paperwork in for the financing. Again, buyer beware because if you look at the last sentence, failure of the seller, failure, so the buyer didn't get all the paperwork in and the seller does nothing. So if he doesn't call for it, which he can do that, so then the failure of the seller to timely deliver the written demand for financing evidence constitutes a waiver of seller's right to terminate pursuant to this provision. So again, if you have a backup contract, you just want to make sure you get all your paperwork Paragraph 4 under taxes and assessments, that's pretty clear, cut
Thank you.
and dry.
Is there one that I could just have? Can I take one of those or?
What? Oh, Krista? Krista?
Krista, somebody asking, calling for you on your call.
Krista, your microphone's on. Um, 4.2 is about community development charge. So if you're writing a purchase contract on an area that does have the community development charge, and, that could be
Oh.
in
I'm sorry, June or Joan, did you call my name? I had to run away from my desk.
Well, I called your name because your microphone was on and we were listening to it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Just a little chaos here.
Fortunately, you didn't say anything horrible, Krista.
Yeah, right? This is such a dumb class. Oh, wait, I'm just kidding. No, I'm on here for key reasons. I mean, there's little parts that we don't always read. So I'm just kind of here to make sure I'm not missing something.
It is so true. And Krista, you probably know more about this than anybody on the community development charge. Because if you're the buyer's agent, you're not real familiar what areas that do have
Right.
that. And if you're the listing agent, you just were negligent and didn't put it in.
Yep.
Then you probably wouldn't really find out about it until you got to the closing. Or
Yeah, and
you
it's
got-
really sad that MLS, I don't know. People, I know certain communities that have CDAs and the listing agents consistently don't, they say no community development assessment. And I don't know how they get away with that, because if they say no, well, if you say yes, you've got to find the instrument number and the volume or whatever it's called. But it takes a little bit of work. So yeah.
And I mean, when you lived in Powell, they had a community development charge.
Yes, for Golf Village, it did, yes.
So just do your due diligence if you represent the buyer. If you think it is, check it out. Fixtures and equipment, this is really important, everybody. It lists all these things that are on there that do stay with the house. What page is that on? And anyway, so for instance, like where you see attached mirrors, trust me, I'm sure there's a lot of realtors that have bought a mirror in their career. I have. But sometimes you might go into a bathroom and you just think it's the bathroom mirror. You don't realize that it's hanging on a hanger. And so when the sellers leave, they can take it with them. So it says attached mirror. So hopefully the sellers will do that. Well, easy things like attached wall carpeting. They did add water heater because some people now rent their water heater, so they had to put it in there that it stays. Anything else that you want to ask for and include in the following? You might want to ask for all of the draperies in the house because they're not attached. And if you want them, just don't assume that they stay. You have to ask for it. Now, window blinds are attached to the blinds, but the material fabric is not. Maybe there is a nice swing set in the yard. You want that to stay right in there if you want it. So let's go down to things that will be excavated. So there's a swing set in the yard, but it's 20 years old and it's all rusted. You better put in there that you want it to be removed, otherwise the sellers might leave it for you. And then, of course, 5.3, leased items. So again, this is really careful, like when you list a house or when you sell a house. Some people do have their water heater leased. and look at the listing, write the purchase contract, and if it says they have leased items, they should list out what they are. If they lease a water heater, then if you see that in the listing, you need to write it in there. Because otherwise, your buyers are gonna move into a house and don't have a water heater. Inspections and tests. And I know you all know they have to be a licensed qualified inspector in order to do, well, they should be licensed to do the inspection. Now, if you have Uncle Bill, that in his daytime job, he's an attorney, if he wants to do the inspection, he can do that, but you cannot be asking for a request of revenue based on his inspection and expect anything to be done. It has to be done by a licensed inspector. And it does say, 6.2 says, seller shall cooperate in making the premises reasonably available for inspections and or tests. I mean, Suzette, had a contract, oh my gosh, back in the fall, and her seller would let anybody in to do the inspection, and it really fell apart over that. Okay, 6.3, specified inspection period. So if you put in there 10 days, what's the date today?
Is the
Eight?
10th.
Oh, the 10th, oh my
Yeah.
God. Okay, so if you do the inspection today, I mean, if you do the contract today, or let's say it's accepted today, if you have 10 days from acceptance. So the contract is accepted today. So day number 1 starts tomorrow, January 11th. So can you help you count your days? But people have actually messed up with this. And so within that 10 days, you have to have the inspection done. If you're gonna have a country property with a well and septic, you gotta make sure they can get these things done in 10 days. Because if we haven't done the 11th day, then yeah. So anyway, the buyer tells what all, he can have done. And again, it's really, you need to explain to your buyer what all this means. So inspection of the premises, well, that makes sense. Inspection or testing for radon, so if your buyer's never bought a house before, they're gonna say, well, what's radon? And you need to explain what radon is. And I usually tell people that it can be a cancer-causing gas in the soil. And there is an acceptable reading. If it is above 4.1 picocuries, then you might want to ask the seller to mitigate for that. And they're gonna go, what's that mean? And so you should know enough about it to, say what they do in the basement, the pipe that goes outside. And we usually do not, we used to years ago, we would write that in the purchase contract to say that they would have it done. And it should not be more than 4.1 picocuries. Now we don't ask for it because you look at the seller and you've asked for that, the seller asks his agent, well, what's that gonna cost me? Well, if you do have radon, it's gonna maybe cost you $1,500. And so then the sellers go, well, then fine, we're gonna ask $1,500 more. So don't write it out separately, it's already there. Inspection or testing for lead-based paint. You know what, I've been in the business for a long time, I've never had anybody to do it, but if they wanna have it tested, they can. And that would only be applicable to a property built before 1978. A termite report, maybe. Gas lines, usually not. Waste treatment system, yes, if they have a well and a septic, you do really have that checked. Determination of the need for the cost of federal flood insurance. If you have a property, and that property is in a flood, what do you call that, flood something zone? Flood zone, then you have to pay extra money to have
Joan, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So this gas line, inspection of the gas line, I know this was popular back before when I was selling new homes, so I never had to worry about it. But then it went away. I feel like nobody has inspection. Was it used to be a requirement or what?
Now, it used to be a requirement, and then at some point, maybe early 80s, I don't remember, but with our home warranties, there is a gas warranty included with that, so we just quit doing it. So I guess if you kind of think about it, if you're selling an old property, it could be in Clintonville or Westgate or wherever, it was built in the 1920s, and you're not going to get a home warranty, I would certainly want to get a gas line inspection. So.
Just lost.
What?
I think you just double check, make sure you're still on.
Oh, I see him here.
Okay. That is.
So 6.4. If the buyer does not like what's found on the home inspection, then they can elect to do the following. They can ask the seller to fix things, or they can just back out the contract. So. And then the seller, if I were writing this contract today, I would probably give them like 4 or 5 days to come back with an answer. So I want to back up a minute. So in the inspection period of 10 days, so you have 10 days to get it done. If you get it done in 5 days, and you go to the seller with some things you want done, their 5 days does not actually start until the 10 days is up. So don't think that they're going to get back to you within 5 days of your 10-day inspection period. Does that make sense? Yes. So, if they're going to terminate the contract because of the inspection, 2 things you need to do. You need to do a termination of the contract, that form. And on that form, you would say paragraph number 4, inspections and tests, and that's why you're getting out of it. And you also want to do a mutual release. And even if you have not collected their earnest money deposit, you still want to do a mutual release, because the mutual release says, hey, we're done with this contract. There's nothing else against the buyers or the sellers or the agents. We're just done with it. So even if you don't have that earnest money, still do a mutual release, boys. And with those 2 forms, you can send the whole inspection, or you can send the part of the inspection that is applicable to the reasons of why you're getting out of that purchase contract. Failure of the buyer to deliver written notice pursuant to paragraph 6.4A constitutes acceptance of the condition of the premises and shall be a waiver of the buyer's right to terminate pursuant to this provision. So here's where it's almost like agent beware, because if you had the inspection done and you send in the buyer's agent, you send in the request to remedy to the seller's agent, but you miscount the days and so you send it on the 11th day. Well, sorry, doesn't work. So unless you've got a really good seller's agent, because we'll grant you an extension, but if they have a good backup offer, they will. So just be sure you stay within your timeline and you know what it is.
Joan?
Uh-huh.
So I'm noticing a lot on contracts that people are putting in where the buyer shall have, X number of calendar days after the end of the inspection period to reach a written agreement or to terminate. And a lot of people are putting in like 0 or waiving and then the agents are saying that, you know, I don't know how I want to say this. So some agents are taking that as that you're not going to terminate if there's something that you deem wrong with it, or,
No, you can still terminate because you didn't take that part out of the contract. So unless you said up there in that little box, first part of the contract, unless you said that, the buyer is not going to ask for any remedies. They're only, not ask for any remedies. Otherwise, if you don't put that in there and you have no days in the inspection period,
Yeah.
and if it has a lot of problems, you can still terminate the contract. And not all agents maybe read it that way, but that's what the contract says.
yes, and then sometimes they're just putting the word waive in there. So I would say if the intent is for us to say, okay, we're not going to ask for repairs, but we still want to reserve the right to terminate based on the home inspection if the buyer deems that there's something major, right, that we should just put it in our additional terms and conditions. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And so, I always say with purchase contract, it should be really clear. I mean, like, your sixth grader could read it and know what it means almost, so. Not quite that easy, but I mean, it should be spelled out so that everybody knows what it says and that we don't have guessing games. I had an agent, he sold his own property, and the way and he's a good agent. The way he wrote with the other agent that sold his own property. No. So Bob owned a property and another agent, another company brought him a contract. And the way the appraisal clause was written, it said that if it did not appraise for the contract price, that the seller had to lower his price. That's what it said, but it didn't really read that way. And so we got two attorneys involved, and the attorney said the way it written that Bob had to sell his house for less than the asking price. It was tricky. I mean, I read it one way, my agent read it the same way, the other agent read it another way, and he had to sell it for less money. And that was with two attorneys. So again, we have to watch these other agents. Sometimes they can be tricky. Okay, so 6.5, and I love this because it's so spelled out. That's about condominium or homeowners association document provision. That says everything that the seller has to provide to the buyer, and it gives them a time frame. And just kind of FYI, in .move in our documents for listing a property, I have these all written up so that when you go list a condominium, you give that to your seller and say, these are the items the buyer's gonna want to do. So kind of warn them up front. And then 6.5 is a review period about the documents, etc. And again, make sure your buyer understands that once they get this, that they do have to review it. And you might kind of want to help them with that to know what to look for. And, if they don't review it, they don't object to something, maybe they've got a big, I don't want to say that, raise in their monthly fees because the condominium complex has to get a whole new roof in 2022 and nobody found that. So you just got to be really careful and make sure they do read what's provided to them. Home warranties, know your warranties. So when you
Can I ask you to go back real quick? I'm sorry. I'm trying to hear you on this. Regarding the, is that only for condominiums? that paragraph that you just went through? 6.
No, that is for, association, no, wait a minute.
If the premises is a condominium or is located within a community governed by a homeowners association. Okay, well, it always helps if you read it, but I hadn't gone through this one in a while, so.
I know, I haven't either, and it is only the condominium association.
Well, it says any community that is governed by a homeowners association.
Yeah,
In six-
okay, right. it does.
6.5A.
Okay, yeah, it does.
Hey,
I do.
Joan, this is Greg Ramsey. I have a question on that. I actually live in a condo and I know many of the associations publish this on their websites. So is it, I guess, is it fulfilling this if you're giving a possible buyer the, I guess, all those documents via access to an online website, or do you actually need to give them hard copies?
No, if it is all there, you can direct them to that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, sometimes if it's online, you have to pay for it.
Yeah.
So so I wouldn't do it that way.
And you're right, and also, there is nothing on here that the seller should have to pay for, nothing.
Yeah.
And you're right, Chris, because if you go online, you might have to pay. So I guess the big thing in this is almost more so when you list the property, make sure your seller does all that together.
But what do you do, Joan, if you have the buyer and you're asking for this? Because I'm finding that it's really hard to it's like pulling teeth to try to get some of this information. And some are not as organized, they don't have it, or like Chris has said, sometimes they want you to pay for it before you can get it. And that 5 days just isn't a lot of time if you're on the buyer end of it. And most of the time, the buyer's not going to walk away because they didn't get that in that amount of time, all of those things. So this is just a real sticking point with me because it's not the easiest thing to get.
You're right, and, technically, if the seller doesn't provide it, then the contract's null and void, but that's not what you want for your buyer.
Right.
I don't know, it's like a lot of other things. Sometimes it's hard to get the co-op agent to provide what you want. And yet, if that agent wasn't, I guess I would have to maybe go online and see what I could find. I don't know. Or go to a title company, see if they can help you. But I know, I agree with what you're saying, Caroline, because sometimes it's just hard to get through some other agents, So I guess the only thing I can say, as a listing agent, we want to do our best to have it together. And you know what, if you didn't have it, Caroline, I think if I didn't get it within the 5 days, I would probably write an addendum and give it an extension. I mean, somehow I'd want to get them to get it for me.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because you don't want the buyer to lose their property because the other agent isn't doing the job, so.
Right.
Okay, we talked about home warranty, just know your warranties, and, you might want to provide a couple to your buyer and say which one would you rather have, the buyer will care, but, kind of nice to give them a choice. And I know for some warranties, the company, if you have a problem, you call that wrong number and say, my furnace is not working, can you send somebody out? This home preferred warranty, you call your own service provider. And I know for me, I would be like, really? I gotta find my house is cold and I've gotta find a furnace company? I don't know. So, just kind of know the different ones and see what appeals to your buyer. Number 8, they have to give a general warranty. can be a fiduciary deed. You know, a fiduciary deed would be like if a property is in a trust or something like that, so. But anyway, just what the buyer. 8.2, seller has not transferred, conveyed, or reserved, nor does seller have any knowledge of any prior transfer, conveyances, or reservations of any coal, oil, gas, or other mineral rights or interest in the premises. So sometimes when you're selling properties out, you know, like out eastern part of Ohio, they seem to have gas wells out there. So again, you know, what you're selling. Title insurance. And again, when you're working with the buyer, you know, you just want to say title insurance assures you that you're getting a good and clear, you know, title to the property, and make sure they understand that the seller pays for that. 9.2 disregards the title commitment, and that should be sent to the buyer within 15 days prior to the closing. And again, they don't send it to the buyer, they send it to the buyer's agent. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that we get it to the buyer and explain to them what it is and ask them to read through it. So, and I'll give you an example of an agent in my office. It's that. She sold a property out in Westerville, and it was in a subdivision and had a lot of trees in the backyard. And so the buyer said to the agent, you know what, that's far too many trees. So we want to make sure that we can cut down some of those trees if we buy that property. So the agent, instead of like checking that out, she asked the seller's agent, are there any deed restrictions about cutting down trees? And he sent her a text and said, no, not that I know of. Well, anyway, so there's a lawsuit, of course, because they bought the property, they couldn't cut down the trees. So when you get this title commitment, you need to read through it and make sure your buyer reads. And then the other thing with that is, honestly, in the title commitment, it did not say anything about the trees. But then at the closing in the deed, it did say that no trees could be cut down in there. And of course, nobody read it because usually at the closing, nobody reads the deed. So I kind of learned something myself like that. Well, yeah, they missed it there. But honestly, if the agent had not relied on the seller's agent, if there were any big restrictions, it wouldn't have happened. So we need to do our own due diligence. Number 10, utility charges, condominium charges, interest charges, security deposit. It just says through the possession that the seller shall pay all accrued utility charges and any other charges that are lien on the property. And if it is a rental property, we should prorate that. And the security deposit, and again, I know everybody sells some investment properties, so security deposit shall be transferred to the buyer. So that's what it says for the buyer. Now, if you have the seller of that property, you gotta make sure that he understands that that security deposit will be, you know, given to the buyer. 11.1, risk or loss to the premises and appurtenances occurring prior to closing shall be borne by the seller. So what could happen here is, you can put a property contract, you're gonna close 30 days and, 2 weeks from now, they have a fire in the kitchen. And so they have to replace all of the cabinets, repaint, do whatever they have to do, and their insurance fund will take care of that. If this happens, the selling agent should notify you, and you should notify your buyer. The buyer might say, I just cannot live in a property that had a fire in the kitchen or whatever. They might want out the contract. So if that happens, it just tells you here what you have to do. Or it could be a really big fire, and they might still want the house, you don't know. But if it happens, you have to notify your seller and go by what's in the contract. I need a drink, anyway. Earnest money deposit. You can put in there, let's say it's $1,000. You can do it within 3 calendar days after acceptance of the contract by both parties agreeing, or you can do it 3 days after the expiration of the agreement to remedy period. I almost do number 2, but then your buyer can decide what they want to do. So this just talks more about the earnest money. And when you get it, you have the envelopes up front, you fill it out and give it to Lisa, so. And as far as the listing agent, they want to know when you have that deposit. You can fill this page out, you can send that to them, or we have a form, and I forget what it's called. Anybody know? I forget. There's a form we can fill out and send to the other agent so that they know that you have payments.
It's just page 10 of the agreement that you can.
Yeah, you can do that, but we also have another form that you can do if you want to, as opposed to that. And then 12.3, this says what happens to the earnest money. So, different places in the contract is if you don't get your financing, your earnest money returned. If this doesn't happen, you get your earnest money returned. Well, 12.3 says that if anything, that this contract falls apart, you don't get your earnest money back until we get a mutual release signed by the seller. And so always make sure, if you're collecting $1,000 or $3,000 or $5,000, make sure that you make your buyer realize that at the end of the day, it goes to this 12.3 that says you have to have a mutual release signed in order to get the money back. And again, I had one last year. It wasn't a big deal, but I think the buyer just went down the contract. But they had some cracks in their siding, the stucco, and we had to get attorneys involved because the sellers had been really bad. So in 12.3, so A, if the transaction closes, they get their earnest money back. B, the parties provide the broker with written instructions that both parties have signed. That's going to be a mutual release. The buyer gets it back. C, the buyer receives a copy of the final court order, because sometimes they have to go to court to get their money back. D, all earnest money deposited that they can agree upon, it goes into their unclaimed funds until, usually after 2 years, the sellers give up and the buyer gets it back, but we can't bank on that. But anyway, you just can't give it back until they get a mutual release. 15, that's all. Nothing we have to put into it. And 13.7 is the FERPA Act. And honestly, I think there's a lot of people that really don't know what it is, but if you have a foreign investor and they're selling a property and they have never paid income tax, they don't have a social security number, then they have to pay like 15% to the IRS. And if in the course of this transaction, if nobody figures out that that seller is a foreign person, as described in the first section, then the buyer would be liable to pay 15% tax to the IRS. And I have actually asked Marie D'Onofrio, she could kind of include this in a little class one time. I think we all kind of know what it means. And I think that the title company would certainly figure out when they're doing all of their paperwork that the seller is a foreign investor. So, but it's there, and you have to kind of be able to explain it to the buyer. 14, professional advice and assistance. This is when we tell our buyers, hey, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a lender, I'm not an appraiser. I sell houses, so just make sure that they realize we are not the expert in matters of tax or whatever. Ohio Fair Housing Law, we all know what that means. Residential property disclosure form, they should be able to sign that the day that they sign the contract. And kind of up to the other agent to provide it. Sometimes that can be difficult. And if they don't provide it in a timely manner, you really need to, well, you can, send the contract if you want to, or you can do an addendum and just ask them again, but you just need to get it prior to the closing. 14, Ohio Sex Offender Registration and Notification Law. On this, you can tell your buyer, if you want to find out if there are any sex offenders in this area where you are purchasing a house, you need to go into the Brant County or whatever county sheriff's department and check out for those people representing the neighborhood. And the reason why we never ever do that for our buyer, you can check today, and 2 days later, a sex offender can move in there. So we just don't want that liability. 15.2, final verification condition. 2, 3, 4 days, whatever you want to do. Prior to the closing, you want to go through the house and just make sure that everything is basically in the same condition as it was on the day that you wrote the contract. And you also want to see if they had repairs to be done or whatever. You want to make sure those things were done. And it depends on what you ask for the home inspection, but if you ask for things to be done by a professional, a licensed electrician or something, you might want to ask that they give you those bills that they pay to know it was done, and not just take the word of it. Possession. The seller is entitled to possession through, and I always put a time and a date on that. So if you're closing on February 14th, you might say possession 9 a.m. February 15th, 2022. But put a time, because the buyer will think if you say February 15th, it means 8 a.m. The seller thinks you mean. Debris and personal property. The seller shall remove all debris and personal property not included by the time and date of the buyer in possession. And they don't always do that, so, and not much you can do after the closing. So when you go through for that final verification of condition, you might want to check that establishment satisfied right there. Now, this was important too, okay. Duration of the offer, so I wrote this today on January the 11th. I am going to leave it open for acceptance through 5 p.m. January the 12th. It's a real hot property, I might say 9 o'clock tonight, or, whatever the circumstances are. But always put a time, 12 o'clock or whatever. And then where everybody signs, if you represent the buyer, please fill in all of your information down here, like brokerage license number, blah, blah, blah. Put all that, and then on the seller side, please put all that in over there, because actually 3 reasons. So the lender wants all that information, the title company wants all that information, and I want all that information. Because if there's issues or problems and they have to call people, and then there's nothing there, and so it just helps if you do it all up front. So, any questions? Oh, somebody in the chat. Let's see. Oh, we talked about that with Caroline and the condo dots. Caroline? So anyway, thank you everybody for being on. And on the contract, if you need help in writing it with clauses and all of that, let me know, let Jim Vickers know. If you're mentoring, let them know, and let somebody know so we can have you to write it the correct way and define the clauses that you need. Hi, Poonam.
Thank you very much, Joan.
You're welcome. Are you in mentoring?
Sorry?
Are you in mentoring, or is Barb training you, or? I just
Oh.
wondered how you're learning how to write contracts and everything. Have you started into classes to learn that?
Yes, I am doing that. Yeah, I am into learning. Now I got it. Yeah, because it's echoing. Your voice is echoing for me. So
Hey,
yeah,
Greg,
I am learning. I'm trying my best to attend all the classes.
good,
Uh,
good.
and I got one buyer kind of thing, but I don't know how to proceed. So I'm just learning it.
All right. And Chris,
Yeah.
are you still on?
Are you talking to
So,
me?
yeah, Chris, I just wanted to say to everybody that you're on the call, Krista Gardner, and Krista is a wealth of knowledge on new builds. She spent many years only doing new builds, and she still does new build, but for a particular builder. But if you have questions, or if you want to know about the area that she's in, is it Cal or Delaware? It'd be Delaware.
I'm in Lewis Center.
Lewis Center, okay. So
Yeah.
anyway, so Carissa is like a wealth of knowledge on new builds, so please, is that okay, Carissa, if they call you?
Yeah, Krisa.
Bye, Joe, thank you. So anyway, thank you everybody for coming, and I'll see you later.
Thanks, Joan.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Joan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Hey, hi. Just gotta figure out. Thank you so much, Ellen.